Next, federal interest rates remain unchanged. Now what? At their meeting this week, the Federal Open Market Committee unanimously voted to leave rates around 4.25% to 4.5%. This as uncertainty looms with the new administration in office, an administration whose leader has questioned the independence of the Federal Reserve. Here to help us unpack the future of the economy and the Federal Reserve is Vance Ginn, president of Ginn Economic Consulting. Welcome, Vance. Explain the Federal Reserve's decision to leave their interest rates unchanged.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you as always. And what they said was, look, they wanted to see what the data is going to show over the next few months. They had a period where they were lowering interest rate, their federal funds rate for a number of times. And now it's in that range, as you mentioned, from 4.25 to 4.5%. It seems like they think that's more of a natural rate for the economy right now. The 10-year note's at 4.5%, so it's right in that range. But I will say that I'm a little concerned, according to your numbers you just put out there, that their key measure of inflation is up 2.6% year over year. And so that's well above the 2% rate where they would like for it to be. So I still think that their fight to slay the dragon of inflation is not over.
So what do you think they need to do? They have this meeting regularly.
Well, they do. About every 6 weeks, they have this meeting. And so what I'm hopeful that they can start to do is to reduce their balance sheet. Their balance sheet still remains around $7 trillion. It was $4 trillion before the pandemic and everything. So it's still up about 75%. And when you print that much money, put that much money into circulation, and you don't have goods and services increasing at the same rate, you're going to get persistent inflation. And unfortunately, that's what we've seen. And I think that's one reason why people came out like they did in November and voted for a different direction.
Okay, and the Federal Reserve makes these rate decisions independent of the office of the president. Trump has mentioned changing that. Why is he calling their independence into question, do you think?
Well, one reason is that Congress is the one that created the Fed. It was created in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, but it is funded by private banks across the country through fees and other things. But the other problem here is that the Federal Reserve is running losses of more than $200 billion. At the same time, they're funding the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, by about $600 million. And so there's been this separation between the executive branch or government in general and the Fed to have the Fed have independence and hopefully allow them, to not look at what's going on politically from one cycle to the next. However, much of it ends up being very political, and it often seems that way to the American people. So I think that President Trump is right to say, hey, look, what's happening at the Fed? They're printing too much money. They need to get control over inflation that they created. However, I do think that we need more rules in place by Congress to say the Fed can't do, raise the interest rate too much or lower the interest rate too much. Put it by rules instead, and that will put us in a better direction.
And what do you think the office of the president could do? What action could Trump take to take more control over the Federal Reserve?
Well, at this point, I don't know if there's a lot of other action. There's some browbeating or some bully pulpit that he can use through Twitter and other player X and other places. But at the end of the day, I think, May 2026 is when Jerome Powell, the current Federal Reserve chairman, that's when his term is up. That's the next time for President Trump to nominate a new chairman. And he was the one that nominated him 2 cycles ago whenever he was president before. And so I think he will nominate someone else who hopefully has a better idea of where monetary inflation is going and how to deal with these sort of situations in the future.
Do you have any sense of who he's looking at?
Well, I don't. I know there have been different names put out there in the past. Judy Shelton is being one and some others that are out there, John Taylor. But I don't know who that is currently. And we'll also see what happens over the next year and a half. And I'm also hopeful, too, that we can see a lot more pro-growth policies out of the Trump administration that will free up supply throughout the economy from deregulation, tax cuts, and less government spending. That would be a great way to help out with lowering the prices of goods and services that has this affordability crisis happening across the country.
And yeah, I want to get into Trump's agenda and its impact on affordability. But first, what are the pros and cons of reducing the independence of the Federal Reserve like we've been talking about?
Well, the cons of that would be that you have more political persuasion over the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy of setting interest rates, their balance sheet, basically bailing out a lot of the overspending by Congress and the national debt being 36 trillion. You could get the Fed to try to buy more of that. But the pros of it is that you have the situation where, maybe if the president was able to help out some or tell the Fed what to do more, that they could come in and have a better connection between what's happening in deregulation and tax cuts of what's happening with fiscal policy and connecting that with monetary policy. So there certainly are pros and cons. Oftentimes, though, I think maybe many of the cons outweigh those pros.
Yeah, and who knows who the next president will be and the next president after that. So one of Trump's chief strategies for lowering inflation, like we've been talking about, is increasing domestic oil production. How big of an impact could his plan have on inflation? And how soon do you think folks could feel pressure from the pricing pressure easing up here?
Well, I mean, we've already seen through executive orders, there's been a national energy emergency to try to bring more energy production online, opening up Alaska, Anwar sort of production there, offshore drilling as well, that the Biden administration had shut off for a while. And so those things will already start to put more production, more oil in the pipelines, and allowing for prices across the board to have some easing. I mean, oil and gas is in most of the goods that we buy on a day-to-day basis. So if you start to lower those prices and lower those costs, that also contributes to lower prices across the economy. And so I think that would be very helpful. And we could see that, I think, very soon in the next couple of months as that oil gets back in the pipeline.
Lastly, Vance, small business optimism rose 16% in the month after Trump was elected. That's the highest since 1983. What is your outlook for the economy's future, and what hope do you think there is for any Americans struggling to make ends meet?
I think what the small businesses are saying is like, look, we were being strangled by regulation during the Biden administration. What we see was that there was an increase of nearly $2 trillion in final rules cost for regulations under the Biden administration. That's a hidden tax on all of us that raises the price of doing business and everything else. And so I think what the small businesses are saying is, look, the Trump administration is going to have a different direction for the future of having less, hopefully, government spending and regulation and taxes. And that will allow for them to do what they do best, which is their profitability and invest and hire workers. And I think that will also help American households to not only have more jobs, more money in their pockets, but also have lower costs of goods and services around them. And that will help them to feel much better. I think this was a huge election. And so when you have that sort of election happen, there's got to be a different direction. And that's what we're seeing so far from the Trump administration.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people out there are looking for change economically and in their own pocketbooks. Vance Ginn, president of Ginn Economic Consulting, thank you so much.
Thank you.